give it a minute or so to see if anyone is going to be jumping in. What I wanted to do with this one is, does the sound okay? No. Right. So what I wanted to do with this one is talk about mental health and Ireland. Okay. I was planning on doing this a couple of weeks ago, but life gets in the way, and you know yourselves. So Ireland and mental health. And what I done is I just real loose, real relaxed, nothing too complex, kind of stayed away from scientific literature and journals to a large degree, because there's no real need to be delving too deep into these things. So the first website I went to was mentalhealthireland.ie, because when you talk about mental health, you have so many conversations about it or around it, and with people who throw it out there going, oh, my mental health, what about it? You know, the conversation kind of stops there. It's very rare that you get a definition of what it actually is. Okay, and I think there's downfalls to that, of course, because you can't have a meaningful conversation or a meaningful societal response to an issue if the bulk of people aren't even familiar with the definition of the terms that you're using. Okay, so you can't get clarity on a problem if you're intent on not describing what the problem actually is. It makes no sense. So you're not going to get anywhere. You just end up in a loop of this, and you end up with a phrase, Jerry, thank you, Letitia, thank you, hello, all that stuff. The last time I was on this, I wasn't familiar with the chat thing, so I'm getting there. You can certainly teach an old dog new tricks, as the saying doesn't go, but here we are. So anyway, the website mentalhealthireland.ie, you'd expect it to be broken down, chopped up, and fed back to you in a nice, easy to understand manner, right? So I just read 1 or 2 pages on the site, and in one of the pages, 42 times mental health was mentioned in one bulk paragraphs. Okay, so a website about mental health in Ireland, 42 times they mentioned mental health with absolutely no definition of what it is. So I will attempt to give you a basic definition, just dictionary definition of the terms, because we can go from that, we can work on that. If you want to throw in your own little nuanced definition of it, then feel free. But mental definition, and this is from Cambridge. Sorry, now I'm trying to read things as well as we go. Yeah. We'll see. Like we might talk about the Clonmel thing in a while, because all of this stuff is interlinked. So I had someone say to me the other day, what's the story with you? You put up a video the other day or yesterday talking about a potential workplace fatality in Clonmel, and then the next day you're reading a passage from a Padraig Pearse book. So what's going on with you? I'm like, well, what do you mean what's going on with me? How are the two things not linked? Okay, but either way, I like to bounce around on topics as well, because I think it's all relevant. So the definition of mental is, according to Cambridge.org dictionary, is, quote, relating to the mind or involving the process of thinking. Okay, so mental, we think of this, your mind, your mentality, how you think, how you view the things, how you process things. Okay, so, and then colloquially we have the terms, he's mental, or he's a mad thing, stay away from him, or he's a mad thing, bring him along, you know. So we have, I suppose, the technical term for it, which is to do with your cognition or your mind, your mental process and ability, your thinking. And then we have how it's used, kind of everyday terms. Okay, so he's mental would be his mind isn't right, his thinking is a little bit shaky or faulty. And then for health, we have the same website, quote, the condition of the body and the degree to which it is free from illness or the state of well-being. So is mental health then when our thinking is free from illness? Perhaps, but that begs a question. It doesn't really get us anywhere in terms of a definition, because what would be illness of the mind, or a thinking that is laced with illness? Hello, all these people. Hello. Yes, but what causes a mind to become ill, or can our thinking become diseased, ill at ease? Okay, so that's something to ponder on, and we'll get into that in a few minutes as well. But ultimately, what we're dealing with here when we are talking or speaking of mental health is we need to understand the philosophical underpinnings of the, what would you call them, the institutions that promote or push forward this particular concept. Okay, and ultimately you're dealing with psychiatry, to a degree, general practitioners, you are dealing with pharmaceutical industries, you are dealing with sociologists, that sort of thing, and some psychologists, okay, depending on their training or depending on their field of interest, might speak of this. But the baseline of how they operate is what's called philosophically determinism. And what that means is, I'll give a quote from a great book. It's not a great book, but it's a good read. I had it there somewhere. Can't find it, but anyway, the name is there. Baum, Understanding Behaviorism is the name of it. So, quote, the idea, determinism is, quote, the idea that there can be a science of behavior implies that behavior, like any scientific subject matter, is orderly, can be explained with the right knowledge, can be predicted, and with the right means can be controlled. This is determinism. The notion that behavior is determined solely by heredity and environment doesn't really get us anywhere either, okay? But the point of it is that, and I think governments are operating with the same sort of deterministic view of things, that if you control an environment or manipulate an environment in a certain way, you're going to get a particular response in terms of behavior. Hello, Lady of Era. Hello, whoever's saying hello, you're all grand. Well, how's it going? So if you manipulate an environment, you can dictate what sort of behavior you're going to get out of an animal, or what sort of behavior you're going to get out of a human being. The two of them overlay pretty well, in fairness, even though you would make the argument that you have more nuanced for human beings, and a lot of the time you don't. Okay, so within that, the idea that the environment produces the human response or the behavioral response in the human. What is the environment? Okay, and so behaviorists of this view, this psychologically, this is in the field of the behaviorists, who reject the idea of free will. They reject the idea of self-consciousness, self-reflection to a large degree, and any idea of a soul, anything like that. No, they're not into it. They have a wealth of knowledge that they're after gathering from work that they would have done over the last century at least on animals. You have Skinner and his pigeons, you have Watson and Little Baby, where he produced a rabbit to baby Albert, I think. This is the experiment he done, and at the same time he'd rattle a massive noise behind the child to scare the child. So the child then associated, over repetition, over this being repeated, the child then associated a fluffy innocent rabbit with a terrifying noise. So the fear was transposed from where it was actually caused from the sound or the noise to the animal. So the association of fear and the presence of the animal merge together, and then the child develops a pathological association between fear and an innocent animal. Okay, so and that's the way they operate. So if we can cause this in a bee and we can cause this in an animal, then what happens when we start to unroll this sort of experiment, essentially, across society and onto people? And ultimately, that's what you're doing. It's called social psychiatry to a large degree. And you see places like the Tavistock Institute, in England, they were in the news last year for the gender reassignment, or whatever you want to call it, surgeries that they were doing on children. Irish children were being sent over there. That part of the Institute for Human Affairs, as they call it, that was closed down, as far as I believe. But the Tavistock goes back to World War One in its infancy, at least. Anyway, it might not have had the name, but in terms of how it was developing and growing, its birth would be in World War One. It's an interesting topic for people to go and have a look at, and look. They have websites and all that now. You can go and look, and you can get a glimpse of the sort of mentality that goes behind these institutions. It's largely behaviorist and determinist. That there's no idea of an individual having free will. He's just a person that responds to the environment, and as those on the levers of control in the environment, in society, because it's on us to control society, we therefore control each individual. And there's a logic to it. As long as you adhere to the worldview that they have, you don't have to. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it too much, because who would any of you reject your idea of free will, that you don't make choices in the world? Or would you believe that your choices are totally dependent on what's going on around you? I struggle to accept that, even if it turns out to be absolutely the case, and I have no free will, I have no agency of my own. I would rather die believing that I do than to accept that horrible truth, because then what's the point? Okay. Yeah, so behaviors of this view tend to see a change in a person as being the consequence of the environment, or what's happening in the environment. And so if you control the environment, you can manipulate and control the minds of people. Simple, very, very simple. And you can even do this if you've a bit of a dark streak or a bit of a curious streak in you. You can do this with your friends. Okay. I won't even give you examples of it, but you can try this stuff on. Like, you do it when you're training a dog the whole time. You know, the dog gets the environment, you're part of the environment of the dog. So the dog looks at your body language and all that sort of stuff, feels your tone, feels your presence, and his behavior will alter depending on you, because you are the center of the dog's environment to a large degree. So we have a quote here from Jiddu Krishnamurti, great thinker. Really simple in his thinking, but profound. So simple, it was incredibly deep stuff, because I think he gets to the marrow of what it is to be thinking. So the quote is, you've probably heard it before, quote, "It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." Powerful. And I think you could spend your life chewing on that. That's nearly as good a lesson as you could give a teenager, and have them soak in that, think of that, chew that up, and learn from it and apply it to yourself. So what's he saying there? It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. So if the society you're in is a profoundly sick society, how would you learn that? I suppose one way of learning it is you would look at happiness. Immediately comes to mind. Okay, so are people generally happy? Most people would say, yeah, happy enough. But then to balance that, you would ask, how much stress are these people living under? Okay, and how much of that stress is organic, and how much of that stress seems to be nonsensical? Okay, and his point being with this is that if you were living in a sick society where people, I personally think that this society we're in now is a great example of it. Because there's lunacy around. Like, no one can agree on anything. People are using definitions of words that don't belong to those words, and are arguing whole destructions of society based on flawed definitions of words that they don't even have an ability to have a conversation around, but they still go ahead and using them. Like, that's lunacy. That is, to me, that's cult behavior. When you have your dogma, you have your little criteria of what you need in order to be in with the group, and anything outside of that, you try and destroy in whatever way possible. It doesn't matter if you're being consistent. It doesn't matter if you're being logical about it. Your aim a lot of the time, if you're in a cult, is to demean and separate out from the other. Okay. And I think what we're living in now is a nationwide cult to a large degree, and people are fragmenting away from that. And his point on that would be, if you have 99% of people that are profoundly immoral or sick in their thinking or in their behavior, or in how both their behavior and their thinking line up, then just because you fit in with that and you get on with everyone, that doesn't mean that you're a healthy, well-adjusted person. Okay, most of the room can be sick and warped. And appealing to the consensus and saying, well, sure, nearly everyone does it. That his point on this is that doesn't mean anything. Okay, that doesn't mean anything. The democratization of morality, it doesn't mean anything. You could have 90% of the country or 90% of your family and behave in a certain way. And behaving is immoral, and you subscribe to that and you behave that way too, then you're immoral. It doesn't matter if everyone else is at it. You know? And the lovely thing about Ireland is, and I think the silver lining of the danger we're in this country is, in order to start to defend and want to defend or understand your desire to defend Ireland, the Irish people, yourself, your own history and legacy, you need to reflect on, or for myself, I had to go away and reflect on what I knew about Ireland. What did I know about Irish history? Because it was pretty basic for a long, long time. I would argue it's still pretty basic. I don't know as much as I think I should do. Point escaped me there, but anyway, yeah. So we move on from that. So in order to gain an understanding, then that point might come back to me, it might not. But anyway, either way. So how would you tell if you're just adjusted to a sick society, or whether you're actually a good individual who's striving out on your own? Okay, and exercising your free will. I would always add that. One of the ways of doing this is to engage in psychotherapy. Okay, and that's my interest, that's my area, that's what I enjoy doing. Before I done it, that's what I enjoyed reading about. That's the way I've looked at the world, it's the way I've looked at myself. And I've always been interested in what makes people tick, you know, and what makes people constantly engage in conflict with themselves. It's bizarre to me, because you experience that from yourself and from the world around you. It was always an interesting one to me. So, but psychotherapy, I have a definition over here. The science of medical. Oh yeah, no, sorry, it's not a definition. I'm looking at the etymology of the words here. So psyche and therapy. And okay, so therapy is the history of the word therapy is, quote, the science of medical treatment of disease, from modern Latin therapia, from Greek therapeia, which means curing, healing, service done to the sick, waiting on, or service. And from therapein, quote, to cure, treat, or to cure or to treat medically, literally to attend, do service, or take care of. And psyche then is, we think of psyche as psychology of the mind, but an older definition, or an older meaning of that word from Greece, I believe, is soul. Okay, that word has absolutely got thrown out, flung out with the last person bending the knee in the Catholic Church. It got flung out, which is, I think it's a loss, because the alternative to a soul, which is the encapsulation of the whole of what you are, to me, is we get left with mind. We get left with psyche, meaning the mind, which means your thinking, which is only one faculty we have. So to put such a massive emphasis on just your thinking or your mind or your mental health is to me, to disregard the rest, or to ignore or negate the rest of what we have. Okay, and we're at a loss there automatically before we even start anything. We're already on shaky ground. So psychotherapy then means to attend to do service, or to take care of your soul. Okay, now when you hear the word psychotherapy, what you automatically think of is maybe two chairs, the guy sitting across going, No, psychotherapy doesn't need to involve another person. Okay, I think Carl Jung said it, that anyone can engage in therapy, in analytical psychotherapy of themselves. They just need to have the right moral fortitude, which I think what he's saying there is you need to have the ability to look at yourself in all your not so nice areas, and even in the strengths that you have that you shun from yourself. Okay, so, and I think that's a lovely way of looking at it, instead of looking at it from the mental illness part, that my mind isn't working or my thinking is faulty. Instead, I'm looking at it from I'm taking care of, or I'm in service of my soul. You know, and that might smell very religious to people, and it might make them go, but it doesn't. It's just, I think it's just as relevant a way of looking at yourself than Stanford Prison Experiment, because I was trying to, yes, yeah, exactly. Crazy stuff. Go and read that book, The Lucifer Effect. I think there was a movie made of it as well. I haven't seen it, so if it's any good, Jasmine, if the movie, if you've seen it, is any good, throw in, give a comment on that. But if there's any documentaries around, go and have a look at it. The Stanford Prison Experiment. Philip Zimbardo is the name of the dude that, not the dude, very American, but the name of the professor or the lecturer that conducted this experiment. Crazy stuff. In a matter of days, people, under the guise of having a bit of authority in a simulated environment over other people, they were probably that close to sexually abusing these people. They were already abusing them, so God knows how far that would have went. It went so bad so quickly that it had to be called off. And interestingly enough, I think that research was funded by the US Navy. So you when you get into this kind of stuff, like, so the Stanford Prison Experiment, you have military funding who are pumping money into a university in order to experiment on a group of people to find out what happens when you give them even simulated authority over other people. And they're taking that research, they're taking that information, and they're pumping that back into the military, probably back into the intelligence services, which is pumped into the media, which is then utilized across society. So it all feeds back into each other, into one another. Okay, so we've another, I suppose, speaking on the point I was trying to make there a minute ago, but in a far better form. We have R.D. Laing, who was a Scottish psychiatrist, I think in the 60s or 70s. And I think he recognized what was going on, where you're reducing everything to brain activity and to psychopharmacology, antidepressants, all that stuff. I think he's seen what was going on there as a psychiatrist working with the lunatics, right? The crazies of the world. And he went the other way. He went more towards the soul than just the mind, okay? And this quote is, quote, "From the alienated starting point of our pseudo-sanity, everything is equivocal. Our sanity is not true sanity. Their madness is not true madness. The madness of our patients is an artifact of the destruction wreaked on them by us, and by them on themselves." A lot to think of there. So what's he saying? I'll nearly have to go back and read it again to try and give you my point on it. But so their madness is not true madness. He spoke of the idea that one person perceiving the sky as grey, and it's like the Krishnamurti thing of the one and the many. One person perceiving the sky to be grey against 99% of people who perceive the sky to be blue. The first person could be considered crazy, you know? But is he really crazy, or does he just have a different opinion or a different perception of the world? And that was the point that he was kind of making. So do people just become crazy, or what is in that? And he ended up bringing it back to the family of origin, the childhood, all that stuff. All the stuff that kind of has become a faux pas for a long time. So you have Sigmund Freud who done the same thing, and people are, oh, don't go near him because he done this. Who cares what he done? Look at his ideas. The person itself is irrelevant. He could be the worst person in the world, but he could have great ideas. So doesn't mean he behaves according to them, but he might have great ideas. So the second part, yeah, so their madness is not true madness. The madness of our patients is an artifact of the destruction wreaked on them by us, and by them on themselves. So, are you dealing with a crazy person, or are you dealing with a broken heart and a broken soul? Because they're two very, depending on which path you take, you end up with a different relationship with people, and you also end up with a different society. Okay, I would make the argument, or from what my senses tell me or about the world, I can see that we've certainly chosen one path to the detriment of not only the other path, but to ourselves as well, as individuals and as a nation and as a world. So the damage, yeah, the different paths. So you can look at it like this. I suppose the most prevalent common understanding of depression is that it is a lack of serotonin being released in your brain. Okay, so your brain is not on a par with the average level of certain chemicals. Okay, and the answer to that then is to prescribe you what are called SSRIs, which in theory allow for your body to start creating or producing or taking in more serotonin from the tablets or from its own chemistry, etc. And then this will lead you to not being depressed anymore. There's no proof of that. There's no evidence of that at all. There was, I think it was a meta-analysis that was released last year. I won't give numbers or anything like that because I'll have to go and find it and throw it up. But they looked at a vast amount of stuff on this subject, the serotonin-inducing depression and stuff like that, and they found that there's no proof. There's correlations and stuff like that, but there's no proof to justify the thinking or the belief or the industry of depression. There was no proof to suggest that the serotonin thing was a causal factor in depression. Okay, so if not, then what is it? Because the path you can take when you do that is you just throw tablets at it. And you can see the pharmaceutical industry in all of its facets is one of the biggest industries in the world. We've just come out of the stupidest couple of years imaginable because of this industry. Okay, or that industry certainly had a massive part to play in the stupidity and the moral decay in people over the last few years. So the person or the people you end up with when you take that road, which is the medical model road, it's the dominant way that doctors, psychiatrists, and that view these things, view psychological issues, is through a medical model or a physicalist model, where the cause of your psychological or emotional distress has to be down to something physical in you, which is there's an imbalance in your neurochemistry, or there's an imbalance in your hormones, or whatever that is, or whatever the case is. I'm not throwing that out and saying that it has no impact on these things. I'm strictly saying that there's room to maneuver around that. You don't have to lock yourself into looking at it as this is the total answer, this is the only answer, because what you end up with is a society of people that are totally disempowered. They're totally dissociated from their power. And what I mean by that is this: if you believe that depression, anyone can get depression, anyone can, but there's reasons why people don't, and there's reasons why people do. Okay, but if you're looking at depression as this thing that just comes, and for whatever reason, bang, I've the black cloud over me, and I can't get my feet under me every morning, Joe, and I don't know where it came from, and it could happen to any of us, and who knows anything. It just, these goddamn neurochemicals and hormones, they just go bizarre sometimes, right? If you view psychological disturbances or emotional disturbances like that, then you're powerless to help yourself if you ever fall into any of them holes, because you've no understanding. You're after writing off the idea of having any understanding of how this thing comes about in you. It just seems to happen. Okay, that's not. I don't think that that's good enough. And there's plenty of great minds and research to suggest that you don't need to buy into that. So there was Johann, I forget his first name, Harari, I think, or something, was he brought out a book called Lost Connections. Nice simple book off the Easton's bookshelf. However deep most bookshelves go in terms of the quality of the books that they have in that book. This was a nice easy read, and he talks about that, the common things that people had experienced or what that was going on in people's lives who had depression, you know. And a lot of these things are interpersonal relationships, relationship with yourself, relationship with your job, all that kind of stuff, your hope for the future, your misery from the past, all those things. Very, very real human factors. They're not just down to the chemicals that you have in your brain, okay? So I think, yes, if you take that determinist approach, the main model that we're operating under today, okay, it's shaking and moving, but it's still the dominant one, then you end up turning society into hopelessness. People that are full of hopelessness because they could just be hit with depression at any time and they've no way about it, or anxiety, any of those other things you want to talk about, the mental health things, okay? They're just patterns of perception and patterns of feelings about the world that you're in, okay? There's no need to really vilify these things too much, because a lot of the time they're very legitimate responses to what might be going on in somebody's life. So for them to be getting the feeling that they're sick, their mental health is, it's unstable, they can't get a handle on it, and the tablets will work, or maybe they don't, that's an awful place to put someone in, because they don't feel like they have any power to get out of it, okay? But if you take the tact that, of course you're depressed, let's look at the last 20 years of your life, or let's look at the first 10 years of your life, okay? A lot of the time you're going to meet these horrible stories from people, and you go, of course you're miserable, of course you don't trust people, of course you can't maintain a relationship. Perfectly understandable. And a lot of the time, just having someone say that to them is enough for people to go, oh yeah, maybe I do need to suffer a little bit for a while, okay? So great stuff. So the other issue you run into is, we end up, I suppose in Ireland, we ended up exchanging over the last few decades the priest for the scientist, or the doctor, or the psychiatrist, okay? Whereas before we'd look to the altar to get guidance and to be told how we should be, how we should view things, what our morality should be oriented around. No, we don't. We look to scientists, Luke O'Neill on the last few years, this fella. We look to these people, okay? And we take the guidance from these people, because I suppose we would suffer from an inferiority complex in terms of how sophisticated or how smart or how switched on we are as Irish people. I'm not looking for reparations, anything like that. I'm just saying this is where we are at the moment. The Irish people haven't gathered our feet underneath us too much. Racing pigeons, which thank you. So yeah, you end up having a society of people that become dependent on people that they perceive to be, for whatever reason, in a position of authority over them, be it intellectually, financially, or socially, okay? So you end up with a class system in society, which is fine. This happens normally with people. If you throw 20 fellas in a room, a class system will emerge, or a hierarchy. Might not necessarily be class, but a hierarchy will emerge. There's natural leaders, there's natural followers, and then there's natural sneaky fellas that want to be leader, but they pretend to be the follower for a while, but whatever. But you end up with that. You end up with a separation between people, and one group of people looking to a smaller subset of people to guide them, to lead them, okay? And that's largely how society manifests itself. And Sigmund Freud spoke of this in one of his last books, Civilization and Its Discontents. And his question, I suppose, rather than point, was, have we sacrificed too much in the creation and the stabilization of civilization or society in regards the individual spirit. Because going back to the Krishnamurti point, if we have to give up our sense of individuality and our own nuanced way of perceiving the world or engaging with the world or ourselves in order to fit in, then is civilization worth that if that's the ultimate cost? Is the death of the individual, the death of the person that says, you know what, I know all of you like this and want to go ahead with that, but I'm not in. I'm not doing that. And, or worse still, I see this as ultimately wrong and you're all wrong for going along with it. Is the consequence of civilization the murder of those people? Strong argument to be made historically that absolutely, yes, it is. So this leads to, or doesn't lead to, it leads on to the question or the point of two ways of looking at a thing. Okay, so you have the individual way, which is you looking at this, what you are in totality as a human being, as a person, as an individual. But we also, what Freud called the superego, we have a lens of looking at ourselves and looking at the world, which is taken from the world. You can make the argument that this is how we develop our social conscience or our conscience. Okay, that if I'm going to do something, I might be okay with it, but other people might not be okay with me doing it. It doesn't have to be anything illegal. Okay, so give an example, stag parties, that kind of thing. So I'm going to Amsterdam because it's my stag party. As soon as you make that decision, you might be all in for it. You start to think, right, what will your fiance think of this? What will our family think of me heading off to Amsterdam for a stag? They might not, you know. So you can judge or assess your own motivations and your own behavior and actions through the judgment or your own perception of the judgment of other people. Okay, so we're constantly at that. We want to fit in, so we try and look at things the way we think most people look at things. But we also want to be an individual. Maybe not everyone. Maybe people have sacrificed that part of themselves along the way. Okay, but there's still a desire in us or an impulse in us to express ourselves as individuals. The conflict then becomes, what happens if my expression of myself and my world and my experience in the world smashes up against what's socially acceptable? What do? Are you crazy? Are you the lunatic? You hear people say this a lot when they start to talk to people who have similar views. They're like, oh my God, it's so nice to hear other people say this because now I know I'm not crazy. Where does that come from? That comes from a knowing that your general assessment of what's going on jars ultimately with how you feel most other people will assess the same criteria and the same environment and situation. Okay? And this poses a question to each of us. Does it matter more to me to fit in with people, to go along, to get along? Does it matter more to me to do that than to have what I would consider a healthy, honest relationship with yourself, which is I will speak the truth to myself, if to nobody else. I would be honest with myself. For example, I don't like what's going on. Triumph of Baru. Yeah, good evening to you too, and everyone if I've missed you or whatever. I don't even know if I can go back and read these after this. I don't think I can. So if you've any pressing questions, you'll have to use the super chat thing. I think it works because it'll pop up better than, well, you understand. So yes, the conflict in people, and I think over the last years seem to have melted into each other, but over the last 3 or 4 years, I think this was on show par excellence. Okay, you nearly had a universal standard of behavior that was being imposed on people, and very, very, very few people went the other way. Now, they might have in their own minds, okay, because I don't think it's fair to say because people went along with the stuff that they're totally zombies and they're sheep and all the rest of it. I don't really think that's fair. I think there's a large percentage of people, I don't know the numbers, just guessing, who went along for the sake of it, with the understanding that this thing will end soon and I'll just go back to living my life then. Okay. Only to find out that this thing probably would have been kept going for years and years and years if certain people had their way. Okay. But it was on show that you had people who absolutely had no interest in individual liberty, the expression of individual choice, or the asserting of a different worldview. They wanted to shut that down. They wanted all these people. There was horrendous things said about people because they wanted to make a different choice. Okay, which is a very, very sad thing, and I think we will need to go back and have a look at that as a people and say, what happened there? What were you doing there? What was your thinking there? How far would you have followed that logic? Would you have stood people up against the wall if given the opportunity? Because I think a lot of people would, or would have. They might say they wouldn't now, but it didn't look that way at the time. Okay. So you had a large percentage of people that were gung ho for this. You had a middle percentage of people who were just doing what other people were doing for the sake of getting on with their lives. Fair enough in certain such situations. We do it. We all do it. Okay. We don't all live Wild West free. As much as we say we'd like to, we don't. And you probably can't. Because you'd be sectioned off. You'd be thrown in somewhere. And then you had another percentage of people, regardless of how small or big it was, we don't really know, that looked at what was going on, assessed it for themselves, and decided, I'm not going along with that. And I don't really care about the consequences of it. Okay, so you have three categories of people there, and there's probably different shades of it again along the spectrum, of just from one situation, which was happening to everyone at the same time. It's fascinating stuff. Fascinating. So that's the conflict between the individual and between society. And that alone is enough to create the isms or the symptoms of what are termed by psychiatry as mental illnesses or mental health issues. You know, the very fact that you're now aware, there's no denying this, that there is a large percentage of the population, which is the people that live around you, who are perfectly willing to take away your ability to make a different choice than them. That's terrifying. That's terrifying. If we're being honest about it. Hang on a sec. And not only is it terrifying, but if that was those lockdowns and the pressure that was put on people, the pressure, relentless, all the newspapers, all 6, 7, 8, how many of them are there? They all had the same front page cover, the same, what would you call it? The same editorial choices were being selected in all these newspapers. All the news channels saying the same thing. All the radio stations saying the same thing. All canteens around the country, people saying the same thing. Wherever you went, doctors, scientists, everywhere. Government officials, the guards were stopping people from going to the beach, walking on their own, like crazy, crazy stuff, okay? If that was to have continued for another year, I would go back to the Phillips and Bardo Stanford prison experiment. I think we would have seen some horrendous things happening. Not that they weren't horrendous to start with, but I think you would have started to see some seriously horrendous behavior happening to people. I think people would have been really, really badly damaged. And I think there would have been a massive loss of life. Because I think if that stretch was to continue on for another year or two, I think you would have been looking at a civil war. And I think you would have been looking at people being rounded up and badly, badly damaged. And that's crazy. So to all of a sudden, pretty quickly, because there's been no, as far as I know, there's been no official statement to come out and say that COVID is gone now. It's gone. It's finished. We got past it. We got through it. We made a few mistakes along the way. We done some things good. And we're all, a lot of us, not all, a lot of us are healthy. And now we move on. That hasn't happened. The hex that created is still hanging over people. Okay. And not only is that hanging over people, but the feeling of animosity that that generated, and people are culpable for this. And the I think justice is yet to be served, and the final answer is yet to be given on the last few years. Okay, but the animosity and the turmoil and the way that how people viewed other human beings and how that was changed, molded, and distorted over the last years, that has to go somewhere. That hasn't been resolved. Okay, it's not like you just think, oh, I'm nearly going to ring the guards on my neighbour there because they're out talking to another guy and they don't have a mask on. Or so and so's gone to the gym and sure, that's in a different town. Definitely ringing the guards on them. You don't get over that sort of lunatic behaviour or overly invasive behaviour into another person's choice. That doesn't go away just because people aren't coughing anymore. So that gets channeled into something else. And the idea of splitting off from people that you know and looking at them as an other, that's still here. And I think that stuff gets siphoned in and channeled into whatever the next news story is. So you see a perfect nearly divide between the COVID stuff, and then you see it between Donald Trump stuff, and you see it with Ukraine stuff, you see it with immigration stuff, and now you see it with Israel and Palestine stuff. You're looking at the same source, and all of that stuff is interesting in and of itself, for historical reasons, for political reasons, for truth reasons, for the reasons of validity, all that stuff. Interesting details, interesting stuff. We'd all love to know more about it, but we don't have the time, whatever the case. We might not have the interest too much, okay? But for myself, I want to bring that back to what I'm talking about, which is mental health or people's souls. And I think what we're dealing with ultimately is a schism in people's souls. And that is brought about, and this isn't crazy talk either, like all of the nice observational research and stuff is backing what I'm saying up here. I'm not throwing this out. So the idea of going against the psychiatric view or the medical model, it's not lunatic. It's not crazy stuff. Like there's people out there in these fields that are talking about this stuff. But what I'm saying here is many of the political issues and the societal problems you're seeing today is down to that divide, that desire to dehumanize other people. That was initiated and created, and fuel was flung on that over the last few years. And just because the situation that generated that has a different name now, the psychological condition that people are, that created in people, the schism, that didn't go away. Okay. And ultimately, that's bound into the idea of who am I in regards to other people? And how much of myself will I forego? How much of myself will I reject or disqualify from expressing because I know other people don't like it? And you might be able to do that to a large degree or to a small degree and fit in with other people. And you might live a life that you can say you really love and you like. And I won't argue with you. As long as you stay away from me and don't be messing with other people, off you go. Off you go to a large degree. Okay. But you cannot deny the reality that in order to do that, there's a part of you that you had to bury and say goodbye to. You had to attend the funeral of this thing, this part of you that is only yours, and how it's expressed can only come from you based on who you are. You denied that, you buried that, and now you rejected it totally. There's a loss there, and loss hurts. Loss affects us. Loss can motivate us to behave in ways that we do not understand and that we cannot foresee until we move past and experience the loss. Okay? And we can continue then the same game of denying that we do that and pretending that we're socially acceptable in all our flavors. Okay? Hang on there. This is as savvy as I get with some sort of studio. Well, here we go. So ultimately, what I'm saying is, I think we can bring it back to that, and I'd like to bring it back to that. That the mental health pandemic, everyone throws it around now, and it's moved from a vague concept into one that is automatically a negative. And what I mean by that is you'll catch people saying, my mental health is at me. As if the idea of some sort of health, ill or otherwise, with your mentality or with your mind, is automatically a negative to you. So that makes me kind of look and go, where did these terms come from, and why the heavy duty promotion of these things? Like, we need to be more tolerant, and we need to be more open about our mental health. Why? Like, people are kind of throwing it around because they understand that there's a reaction that comes from it now, without having to fully understand the meaning of the words that they're using. And I would like to slowly just bring the conversation away from that. Like, we're more than that. We're more than what goes on in our brain. And the idea of being really, really miserable in life, the life in a really, really miserable, generally, society, that makes perfect sense. Of course you're full of anxiety. Look at what's going on around you. All the money you spend most of your time making money, that a lot of it's taken off you. And it's spent on things that you have no interest in, that you'd never willingly give your money to. Your money's been spent on that. And can you make an argument that you don't want your money being spent on that? Off you go. Don't pay your taxes. See what happens. Okay, so just that alone, that point, that's sad. That's very sad, that you don't get to keep the fruits of your own labor and your time and energy. It's not yours. Other people that you've never met in your life, and probably will never met, will benefit from your work. Okay. And to a degree, maybe there's a justifiable reason for that in small sentence where it happens naturally. But to have it hanging over your head that you'd be arrested and you could go to jail for that, that's bleak. That is bleak. And that will disturb people. Whether you care to admit it or not, it will. Another thing is the idea of never having your own home. I know for a man, I think especially, to not have a claim on a piece of land, whether that's a little one-bedroom shed, whatever the case is, to not have a claim on a piece of land on this earth and in this country and for yourself, that's sad. That's sad. And not only to not have it, but to have very little hope in ever being able to get it, that's incredibly difficult for men to accept and for men to internalize and process. That I might never be able to have my own patch of dirt in this world. That's bleak, and people kill themselves over that. One of the largest sections of suicide in Ireland is middle-aged men, like between 45, 55. And there's a lot of men that are going to grow to that age in this country now who would probably be still living in their parents' home. Their parents might have died and moved on and left a home to them, but they will never have got their own home. And that's sad, and people feel that. Okay? Del Shannon is that the Runaway, the guy with the Runaway song? Great song. But what do you say? Misery. Okay. So yeah, look, what I'm saying is, let's get back to thinking of ourselves as human beings and as souls. Okay, as a collection of all the faculties and all the tendencies and stuff that we have. We're thinking, of course. We are sensing, of course. We like touch. Maybe not everyone. Don't come and hug me, but we appreciate touch. Touch is good for us. Touch heals us. Okay, so we're sensing creatures too. We have feelings about things. We have emotions. If you watch a dog, like a dog's temperament or how a dog presents himself is pretty stable across the day. Okay, humans not so much. We can fly off in 4 or 5 different directions in the space of 2 hours. Okay, it doesn't mean you're crazy. Doesn't mean you're crazy at all. Nothing wrong with being a little bit volatile. Okay, in a society that wants to cut off the rough edges of everything, because that's what a society does. Okay, there's nothing wrong with being a little bit sharp and a little bit volatile. Lovely stuff. Uh, Again, my point is gone. I'd be rambling. I ramble away, but my point is gone. Yeah, and it comes back to me. We're feeling beings. We have feelings about things, a sense of a thing, a feeling of impending doom or a feeling of overwhelming hope. These are waves that ripple through us all the time. And they speak to us, they tell us things, they tell us they tell us our experience of ourselves and of the world. And we don't listen to it as much because we think. We spend so much time talking about mental health that we were constantly thinking about thinking. Okay? And the thinking is we take in sensory information from the world. This gets funneled through our right hemisphere, or the body, our physiological response to the situation we're in the world. That then generates, if you want to look at a causal thing, but that generates a feeling of the situation we're in. And it's that feeling that is the basis of how we start to think about something. Okay? So to just zone in on the thinking and go, this is the primary thing, it's not. And we're severing the tie between how we feel about ourselves physically and emotionally and what we think about how we feel about ourselves. So there's a disconnect there. Interestingly enough, we've a disconnect in our brain. There's a big, looks like it's been severed down the middle. And these hemispheres of the brain, they deal with both different things. Okay. One deals with your physical and your feeling, your sense of self, the sense of the I as an individual, as my own separate individual human being. And the other hemisphere deals with information that you already know, the known. Okay, it deals with everything as an object. It sees you as an object, as a you, as an I. It sees myself as an I. Keith, as a Keith, the person Keith, category Keith. It's not really connected with the heartbeat and the breathing and the change in how you feel about things. So there's the disconnect. We see it in our brain. We see it in ourselves, between how we judge ourselves and how we think others will judge us, and the dance between those two, and how we rectify that. And we see the disconnect between society and the individual. Okay, and you can even see it between groups in the society, where depending on what news topic is on show, you will have nearly military style opposition between people. There's a massive disconnect going on there. And I think while the idea of promoting mental health and being more honest about mental health and all that lovely stuff, it sounds great, it's only feeding into one part of our souls. Okay, when there are different parts that have been long neglected. And I'm going to wrap it up in a minute, but I just want to say as well that moving forward, I'm going to be touching on this stuff a little bit more because I'm interested in it, and I I tend to learn by talking or thinking. I tend to think by talking out loud, which is nice. So I'll probably start addressing this stuff a little bit more because I think it's well needed, and I think we can keep it nice and simple where we don't have to delve into anything too crazy, and we can start to shift how we're looking at things. But ultimately, if you're feeling miserable, if you're feeling abandoned, if you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling suicidal, if you're feeling crazy, if you're feeling like the world is a mad place and I don't fit in, perfectly reasonable, perfectly valid response to what's going on around the world or what's going on in your town or country or whatever the case is. I would just leave you with this though. If feeling miserable or feeling hopeless is down to how you're seeing the world and how you're judging the world, the answer to that problem is in this, it's already presenting itself to you. If you begin to look at all the misery and all the things you don't like in the world and you see them as a justification or a cause in some way for how you're feeling, lovely. Because the remedy for that then is to use the individual yourself to go and try and influence or change the society that you feel is causing you illness in the first place. So the answer, it always starts It goes out and it'll return to yourself, because it has to be. Because at the end of the day, you are born with your own experience of yourself, and that's what you die. Like, those are your last moments as well, is the loss of the experience of yourself. Okay, and all the stuff in between, it's all still the experience you're having of yourself. And I think we get distracted away from that because we think instead of feeling things. We start to think things. We're constantly aimed outwards at other things, Netflix and football and all that stuff. So anyway, thank you very much. Thanks for throwing in all the empathy. Exactly, empathy. And there's a discussion we can have on empathy maybe down the line, because I think it's definitely a topic that isn't explored as deeply as it could be, because there's nearly a theological shift that you can build off of empathy alone. Okay, and I'll try and that's something I'm messing with at the minute. But anyway, have a good, lovely weekend. Have a nice night and all that positive stuff. Trying to read and talk at the same time. But thanks for listening, and thanks for the comments. Thank you. And I log off. Good luck.